God's story, your life. Unfolding short stories. We featured Joe Buchanan on The Unfolding before, so maybe that's a name that rings a bell for you. Joe was featured on our very first episode, page 1, where we learned about his story of childhood trauma, being in the foster care system, and the restoration that God has done in his life after all these years. A couple of years ago, we sat down and had another interview with Joe, and this time he was joined by his lovely wife, Tara. On page 109 of The Unfolding, we talked about their story as they've put their lives together in marriage, coming from very different backgrounds and overcoming the obstacles along the way. And around that time, Joe and Tara launched a new podcast with our Wow God podcasting network. It's called Behind Our Smiles, a marriage podcast. They are a treasure trove of sage advice, of compassion, and relationship coaching. Since it's right around Valentine's Day, I thought, hey, let's peek in a bit further into their love story. I hope it encourages you today.
Everyone loves a good love story,
yes.
Especially around Valentine's Day. Just seeing two people kind of somehow have that magical something can always be very inspiring, and everyone kind of wants it, but it's hard to find.
Yeah, it is. And so we have this sign in our bedroom. It's one of my favorite pieces of art in our entire house. And it says,
"Every love story is beautiful, but ours is my favorite." So do you believe that, Joe?
I do believe that. And I do believe that every love story is beautiful.
And I think our love story is a long love story. We can't quite fit it into a 10-minute burst of time, because it's a long love story when God works from two people that are broken.
Are you saying I'm hard to love?
When two people, not just one person, when two people are broken and we both have to work through our brokenness to find a way to love each other, that's a beautiful love story, but it's not always perfectly crafted. And with all the ribbons and roses.
And I think if we're being perfectly honest, there were times during that love story we might have said, this isn't quite so beautiful.
This is not so romantic.
Yeah, and I think the reason for that is because at the heart of every really good love story, and definitely at the heart of our love story, is this little word that...
It's a big word.
It is a big word, you're right. It's,
I like big words.
This thing called vulnerability. And to be honest with you, even just saying the word has me almost feeling
You kind of just want to slide under your chair under a table to go, okay, people are going to find out what's really going on under the surface. But that is at the heart of loving each other. And we experience moments like that so many times in our marriage that has built our love story.
Right, because coming into marriage, I brought so much baggage. I had so many scars. I had experienced so much abuse as a child, experienced a lot of time in foster care. And if you want to hear my story, it is episode 1 of this podcast. But I had so many areas of my life that I did not have healing for yet.
And as a young wife, I just wanted to be close to my husband and have the love story that I dreamed of. But there always was something in the way. And I couldn't quite figure it out.
Well, what Tara was feeling was true. There was something in the way. It was me running from intimacy and closeness and this fun little word called vulnerability.
Ooh, that's a big word.
I really was, in my life, I just wanted to be healed. I wanted to be normal. I didn't want to have to deal with the things that happened to me as a child. And so I was trying to bury that. And what I didn't realize is I was burying so much pain and so much shame. And I was just trying to stay ahead of it. And I felt like if I could just keep moving forward, I could stay ahead of it.
But you weren't.
Yes. And what ends up happening is I got really cocky about my past, just really prideful, went back and visited one of a spot where some of the more traumatic things happened. And it really wrecked me. It shook me to my core. I'd never realized I was that vulnerable to be really torn down like that. And the way that Tara and I describe it is kind of like my house of cards fell. And it was a very, very difficult season. And it probably would have been a whole lot less painful if I hadn't run from all that stuff. But I was faced with reality of things I had to deal with. And what God spoke to me in that season was this: if I don't trust God in the healing process and take it a step at a time under his leading, in other words, do the work to get to the healing, work with God on that, then I would never have a greater capacity to love the way that I wanted to love. I wouldn't be able to love people, Tara, my kids, the way that I wanted to love. I had hit a wall. I couldn't, I wanted to love more and I just didn't know how. And the reason is that I was hiding all of this pain, and it was really hurting our ability to be close and to grow in our marriage.
And I knew Joe's story, and he told me about the facts of things that happened. And and you know that it's bad. But I think I never had a chance to really see some of those wounds up close and personal to understand exactly how they affected him. And he was very brave to begin to do that because, again, vulnerability is both sacred and scary. It's scary because you could be found out and be rejected. You could be saying that's silly, that you're worried about that. No one wants to be told they're silly. But in those moments that the vulnerability happened, that Joe showed me a different side they hadn't showed me, that was that opportunity for a true love story to grow and how we would relate to each other at that point on.
Yeah, I feel like our love story was very surface, right? We both were committed to love each other. We both were committed to stay together and to honor God to the best of our ability, but we weren't growing deep. And once that house of cards came down, and I came to this realization that I couldn't run anymore, it really forced me to deal with the heart of the issue and to trust God to the best of my ability and to let Tara in and let her see the really damaged parts of me. And what I didn't realize in that, because you think that's so unromantic and unbeautiful and the scars are not pretty and all of those things, but that's what really began to grow the beautiful part of our love story. And that's when the roots really started to grow deep.
Well, that's the example that God has set for us in terms of what does true love look like. It's seeing someone in their brokenness, maybe when they're not lovable, but choosing to love and not reject is a beautiful part. But again, it took Joe being willing to show those unbeautiful parts. And again, I have my own unbeautiful parts as well. But in that situation, taking that risk to say, do you still love me? And for me, learning to respond in a way that was loving to you.
And I appreciate, Tara, the way that you did surrender it to God to say, I can't fix him. This has to be a God thing, and I'm going to pray for him, and I'm going to help him in any way that I can. And it was a season that we walked through, and I wonder sometimes if we are ever going to be out of that season, because the healing process is never over. But I do, looking back, the most powerful moments in our marriage have been the times when we've been able to be vulnerable and having a wife that I can trust, because I didn't know how much I could trust you. I could tell you I could trust you. But in those moments when I really gave you the ability to destroy me, I learned how much I can trust you, and that really grew us.
Well, and that's a sacred moment to be brought into. If someone shows you their wounds or shows you the true struggles and pain that they have, and it takes that vulnerability to respond with acceptance and be at that trustworthiness you mentioned, to say, you can trust me. I will not be mean back to you. I will not use it and throw back in your face. I won't use it as an opportunity to wound you further. And then, Joe, that was the same example that he set for me in the moments that I had to be vulnerable to say, this is actually what I'm going through. And this is some ugly feelings and ugly things I'm working through, that I felt safe to share that with you as well. And it kind of started a cycle of going, okay, if we're going to have a real love story, it has to be grounded in truth, which is here's what's really going on underneath the surface. And I think that was a huge shift for our marriage.
Yeah, and after even 26 years of marriage, we still get awkward in that vulnerability at times.
It's still awkward.
and I think it's okay, because we've learned to be able to say to each other, hey, I'm being vulnerable here. Because sometimes we don't always recognize vulnerability in each other. Sometimes
we're sharing something and maybe the response is a little bit short right away.
Yeah.
And I think that has something that has helped our marriage to go, I'm being vulnerable here. Like, I'm feeling a little awkward sharing this with you. I'm a little afraid of what your response might be if I say this. And sometimes that little reminder of saying, hey, this is a vulnerable moment, that kind of kicks us into gear to go, oh, you have a woundedness here. You have something you're insecure about. How can I be a safe person for you and truly love you even in your brokenness?
And Tara, you have been absolutely incredible. God has worked through her so extensively in my healing process, and the incredible gift of relationship. Tara, I hear you say this a lot about relationships. They're what cause us the most damage, but they are also what can bring forth the most healing.
And so, Joe, every love story is beautiful.
Yes.
But yours Whose?
Ours?
But ours is my
Is
favorite.
our favorite.
Can you say
yes.
that 3 times fast?
No, not at all. But I do believe that it's true.
Owning your love story is a beautiful thing to say, that even when your story has some bumps and bruises along the way, it's our story and it's ours to celebrate.
We share more about our love story and the things that God is doing in our lives, the things we have victory over, and the things we're still struggling through on our podcast. It's called Behind Our Smiles, and you can download it wherever you download your podcast. And the whole goal is to pursue connection, find joy even in the struggle.
Hey, thanks again to Joe and Tara for sharing. If you're in the middle of a love story that could use a little fine-tuning, and really, can't we all? Well, you might want to check out their podcast with the Wow God Podcast Network. It's called Behind Our Smiles Marriage Podcast. They post every week, and it truly is healing and thoughtful and restorative and so much more. They're amazing. Learn more about their podcast and others at wowgod.com. The Unfolding is a Wow God production, a ministry of the University of Northwestern St. Paul